Well, hello everyone. I've got about 30 seconds probably till noon. We'll see if we can get everyone back in. Just a few more seconds here to get everyone in and we'll get started. We're glad that you're here with us today. We're knocking on the door of fall. I'm up here in Northwest Missouri. I'm Gwen Funk. I'm the field specialist in horticulture, and we've not had our frost yet. I don't see anything on the calendar, so we'll see how that's going to play out for the rest of the season. But we've got a great lineup for you today. So I hope that you're able to take something home that you can use. I just want to remind you that we do have field specialists in horticulture scattered around the state. You can see the different regions here and see the names on the screen. So you can reach out to the person that is in your area. Or if you know, if maybe you've heard one of us speak on the garden hour and you know we kind of have a specialty in a certain area that you want to know more about, you can certainly reach out to anyone. And we are happy to help you in any way that we can. Also know that this presentation is live streamed on YouTube at the MUIPM channel. You can watch it live from there. You can also see where some of our snippets are archived and other short videos that we might have pertaining to IPM or integrated pest management. So be aware that that is there. So I think we will stop there and we'll come back to that at the end of the show. And I think we are going to start off today with our weather. I think Zack has joined us and he can tell us a little bit about what's going on. Zack, if you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Gwen. And you read my mind about some things I wanted to talk about today, including that first frost or freeze really dragging its feet this fall. And part of it is because we have seen some warm temperatures in September, and that's now gone into October here as well. But just to start here, looking back at September, we see that Missouri's statewide average temperature was nearly 3 degrees above average in September. So in a time of year when we usually start cooling down, those warmer temperatures stuck around just a little bit longer there. But maybe the bigger story in September was that we had yet another dry month here with the statewide average almost an inch below what we usually see here in September. But if we see this bar graph here on the bottom right, we have 2 consecutive months in August and September where we've seen that drier than average precipitation. So that's resulted in some drought conditions here as we've gone from the late summer into the fall. And so we looked at the statewide average precipitation, but this is a map of how that looked during September. And so this map is showing the percent of normal precipitation for September. And we see anywhere that's yellow, that's going to be drier than average. And so most of the state was dry, but I do want to note a few pockets that saw some wetter conditions. Far northwest Missouri, up in Atchison and Holt counties, have had more rainfall, including around Table Rock Lake in southwest Missouri and some spotty areas in southeast. But for most of us, it was a dry month following a dry August as well. So how has October fared so far? Much of the same. So if we look at temperatures at our major metros here, halfway in through the month, we see that temperatures were 5 to 10 degrees above average so far. So really those warm temperatures from September have continued, and this is why we haven't seen that frost or freeze yet, running much above average for temperatures so far into October. You'll also note that for everywhere except for Cape Girardeau, we're running anywhere from an inch to nearly an inch and a half below average through the first 2 weeks of the month. And we see that with this map here, which just shows that percent of average precipitation through the first 14 days of October. So dry again for most, although we do see a few lucky spots up along the Iowa border, but also down right around Cape Girardeau as well. So, but for most of us, dry once again. And so as a result, this is the U.S. Drought Monitor map that was released last Thursday. And we see nearly the entire state, except for that corner of northwest Missouri, at least abnormally dry, but most of the state is in moderate drought with even some D2 where you see those darker orange colors showing severe drought. And so this has been a pretty significant event, and definitely the worst conditions are south of I-70 for the most part, where we see those D2 conditions, and especially in southwest and south central Missouri. So this kind of 2.5 months that we've been dry has really resulted in statewide drought conditions for the most part. Now, I also want to note that we've been dry compared to average, but we're also getting in the time of the year when climatologically we start to transition into a drier season. So this yellow table here shows Missouri's monthly average precipitation totals, and we see that we peak in May and June, but really hold on to about 4 inches of rainfall per month through September. And October is the month that we start seeing that average rainfall declining to our minimum there in January. So also heading into a drier time of year there on average. Speaking of on average, this is typically when we would be looking at that weather forecast and trying to plan for a frost or a freeze. So just some definitions here. We think of a frost occurring, and this is where you can get some patchy freezing on vegetation at temperatures anywhere from 32 to 36 degrees. But a more widespread freeze is when we get below freezing to 32 degrees. And then that hard freeze, or what sometimes is called a killing freeze, is when we see temperatures get below 28 degrees there. And the table right under it are the coldest temperatures we've recorded in the state so far this fall. And we have not gotten to that frost point. So 3 counties have gotten down to 37 degrees and a handful of others below 40 degrees, but we haven't officially recorded that frost, or certainly not a freeze temperature. Now, the map on the right here shows for the US the average date of that first 32-degree temperature going into the fall. And this light green here for a lot of the state is October 21st through, October 21st through October 30th. And that's coming up where we might look at next week's forecast, and it doesn't look like we're going to be on track there. Also, looking at those darker greens, that's where areas that we have the first frost this week, and we're certainly not seeing that as well. So for the entire state, looks like we're going to be behind on that first fall freeze coming up here. And so let's take a look at the forecast. The good news is for drought, this is the next 7 days forecasted rainfall totals. Anywhere you see blue is greater than a ½ inch of rainfall, but except for Northwest Missouri, which isn't dealing with drought conditions, most of us are going to be closer to an inch of rainfall in the forecast for the next week, with maybe up to 2 inches down in the southeast around the boot heel. So good news for drought relief. And I will note that a lot of this rainfall is going to start as we get into the weekend. So Friday into Saturday, we'll see the rain chances really ramp up statewide here. Looking at temperatures, the next few days are going to be much warmer than average. So the kind of current pattern holding on there. So this is for Columbia, and this graph shows our temperature forecast for the next week. And all these lines are different forecast models, but generally we see highs in the 80s here throughout the rest of the week, and that'll be true for most of the state. Here's our rainfall event where we do cool off. There will be a cold front, but here in Columbia, temperature's only going to get down to 45 degrees before warming back up. And so that's going to be true everywhere. As this cold front comes through this weekend, these are the lowest temperatures we're going to see. So Saturday night through Monday night, definitely widespread 40s, but not seeing any indication of those 30s at this point. And then looking ahead to wrap up October, this is the 8 to 14 day outlook, which takes us almost to the end of the month here. And here we see for the entire US, but including Missouri, a forecast for warmer than average temperatures. And this is why I don't think in week 2 we'll see that first freeze either as well. The bad news with that week 2 outlook is not strong confidence, but they are pointing to maybe some drier than average conditions after we see this rainfall event move through here this weekend. And then I'll leave you all with this seasonal outlook for October through December. looks pretty similar to the 8 to 14 day where warmer than average temperatures are forecasted here. And then we see for that 3 month period, most of the state in equal chances forecast where we're not forecasting wet or dry, kind of not a lot of certainty. But unfortunately, where the drought is the worst, could see some drier than average conditions there. So looking at this seasonal forecast, we might push that first frost and freeze into November, and then it might be a slow start to winter there as well. But otherwise, that's all I've got, and thanks for everyone's attention.
Thank you, Zach. We've got a long growing season, it looks like, this year. So that's something we don't often get. We did have a question that came up in the chat, and I think it might be good to address it here real quick. And I know we have several horticulture specialists that are on the meeting today, so I ask you maybe to unmute and maybe address this. But the question is, when do I bring my plants inside and how do I treat them before I bring them in so that the bugs don't spread to other plants? So any advice from anyone on that?
This is Jennifer Schutter in Kirksville. I'm the horticulture specialist up here. And I will say that the kind of the magic number to bring in plants is 50 degrees, particularly for tropicals, like if you're wanting to overwinter your tropical hibiscus or bougainvillea, mandevilla, and others. Okay, so 50 degrees is the magic number. And what I do is I will take my water hose and I will squirt them down, kind of like wash them off. Take out the dead leaves that have maybe fallen into the pot, get that cleaned up. And if I notice insects, maybe some mealy bugs or something, I would use insecticidal soap. Okay, so that's what I do use. And they make, if you go to Garden Center, they actually make house plant insecticides. So you could get that. But that's what I do. So again, bring them in at 50 degrees for those tropicals. And then like I said, wash them off and then spray them with an insecticidal soap if you need to.
And is that 50 degrees like the high temperature, like when you're getting into the highs? Obviously, you don't want it to go.
Yes, nighttime lows at 50 degrees, they
Okay.
need to come inside. If they're tropical in nature, if you're going to try to overwinter some geraniums, or maybe another type of annual plant that's been out there all season, it's not great to do that. It's not going to be good to try and grow marigold inside your house in the winter. But if you are going to try that, you can wait till it's down near freezing.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything else to add to that? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, this is Katie Kammler. I would also make the comment that check your pots for toads. I have brought in numerous other critters, not just insects. Toads do like to hang out in flower pots in the soil. So check for holes and check for those unless you want a dog chasing them across your house.
Right. I think I brought in a praying mantis case. So I had lots of little praying mantis all over my wall around Christmas time. So yeah, it's good to kind of check for all of those things. That was a really good question, Nanda, I think that's how you pronounce your name. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so we will move on. Katie is going to talk to us about pumpkins, and you cannot go into fall and Thanksgiving and Halloween and all of this without thinking about pumpkins. So Katie, if you are ready, have at it.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, all good.
Okay, so pumpkins is my favorite topic. If you've been around Garden Hour for a while, you know that it is one, or you've seen me out around the state, that pumpkins are one of my favorites. So I like to start with a few pumpkin facts, and then we're going to talk about what we can do with pumpkins. So pumpkins are native to North, Central, and South America. So one that is unique to us. Actually, they were first grown for edible seeds, not pumpkin pie. And the Pilgrims discovered the value of them and their use spread. They have been cultivated for over 5,000 years, and pumpkins were an important food staple for us until World War II. And that's kind of when the pumpkin decorations for fall came into being, because after World War II, most people had refrigeration. And pumpkins kind of became a symbol of bounty. We could set them out on the porch saying, I don't necessarily need to eat this crop now because I have refrigeration and other options for keeping food. And also, a lot of people don't realize that they were also traditionally used and can still be used for livestock feed. Some other pumpkin facts, very nutritious in potassium and vitamin A when you eat them. In 2028, the U.S. record was 2,500 pounds and 2,528 pounds, and it was grown in New Hampshire. The new record, and that's U.S. and world record now, is 2,749, and that was grown in Minnesota. They just had the pumpkin weigh off this last week, and the new one didn't come close, or this year's record did not come close to beating that. So that 2023 record still stands. Pumpkins are about 90% water, and they are members of the cucurbit family, which includes your watermelon, cantaloupes, and cucumbers. So anything that vines and crawls in your garden. And botanically, pumpkins are actually a fruit. And this picture to the left is actually that world record pumpkin. Doesn't much look like a very pretty specimen, but it weighs a lot. Other few pumpkin stats, they don't update these all that often, so the last ones I've got are 2018. Illinois is still far and away the top pumpkin growing state, and the reason for that is Illinois grows 90 to 95% of all the processing pumpkins. So that's all of your canned pumpkin that you purchase, most likely is going to have been grown in Illinois. In 2020, they harvested over 66,000 acres in the U.S., and that's $194 million value in the market. Most of that is fresh market, so that's the ornamental stuff for fall decoration. It also would include your summer squash and that type of thing. And about 14 million in processing. And a little bit of taxonomy and families. Sometimes I get asked, what's the difference between a pumpkin and a squash? And the reality is those names are exchangeable. So pumpkins a lot of times are considered orange and round, but as you can see by this picture, there are lots of round looking ones, but they're not all orange. But we can call any of these pumpkins, any of these squash, and still be perfectly okay. There are 4 common species of cucurbits that we grow that are used in the fall decoration market, and they are actually classified by their stem structure and the fact that they don't normally cross-pollinate. So Cucurbita machata, Cucurbita mixta, or Agriosperma, you see both of those terms for that same one, Cucurbita pepo and Cucurbita maxima. So now to get what we want to do with them. They are multi-purpose, ornamental, and edible. So if you purchase a can of pumpkin in the store to use, it actually comes from this top one, this tan-colored pumpkin. You cut that open, you can see it's bright orange on the inside and makes what we think about when we open a can of pumpkin. If you have ever tried to make a pumpkin pie out of a jack-o'-lantern, probably wasn't the best experience. Nowadays, jack-o'-lanterns are bred to be jack-o'-lantern and be ornamental. So they're while they are perfectly edible, they're not going to taste as good as some of the others. The one on the bottom is Cushaw squash. This is what I grew up with as pie and what I still make pie with today. So there is definitely work involved in making your own, but it is worth it. Here's a little bit on commercial pumpkin harvest. My aunt lives in central Illinois and excitedly texted me one fall pictures of this, and she's like, the pumpkins aren't orange. And so then I realized I had failed in my education on pumpkins for her. So we had to explain that these are actually the pie processing pumpkins. So the equipment is windrowing them and putting them in a cart, and then they're getting dumped in the semi trailers. And I have seen these semi trailers on full of pumpkins on the interstate, which is kind of interesting to see. And they were going to the Nestle processing plant in Peoria. However, while that is your typical pie pumpkin, there are many, many edible varieties, and these are just some. And most of these you might recognize from decorations. So while they can be very ornamental, sometimes we forget that they are also edible. This top center one, this kind of greenish blue one, is Jardale, and that one's kind of valued for different soups. The peanut pumpkin on the top left is very good quality. This one makes a great pie in the center of the Long Island cheese. This is Australian butter. The banana squash or pink banana, they've got different names. Sometimes Georgia candy roaster is one variety. This one is Winter Luxury, which is a Cucurbita pepo. And this one over here is Delicatata squash, which is also Cucurbita pepo. All of these are Cucurbita maxima, so the big varieties. This one's Cucurbita machata, and this one's mixta. And then this one's also Cucurbita machata, which is called a frog pumpkin. There are also varieties for edible seeds. So Lady Godiva, I like the name because she rode naked through the streets, and the seed is naked. So it doesn't have a hull, so makes it great for doing roasted pumpkin seeds. And I also think they're very pretty pumpkins as far as being ornamental. Something else that you may not realize is the squash blossoms are edible. Squash have separate male and female blossoms, so we can actually pick the male blossoms and use those as an excuse to dip something in batter and fry it, perhaps, but it works as edible. And in the last few years, I've also recently found out that pumpkin leaves are also edible, but take some work to get the thorns off. We can carve them. Of course, that's traditional with Halloween, is actually carving pumpkins. Those little saws and the little kits work great. And there are power tools and all sorts of things that you can do to carve nice jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. Something else I enjoy doing is scarring pumpkins when they're growing out in the field. So typically I have a pocket knife, and you do it when they are green so they heal. And so I've done faces, and I've used cookie cutters, although it takes a hammer to get the cookie cutters in to do the scar, but it works well. I've also done the Mizzou logo. And here's a few other ones. We can decorate, whether that's paint them so they last longer. This one with the spider web was a white pumpkin and Sharpie markers. So you can get very creative and do lots of different autumn decorations with pumpkins. And if you run out of ideas, of course, Pinterest is always there to help. So these are white pumpkins with leaves Mod Podged on. And just some other options for decorating. I always enjoy looking at different ideas, and you can even do some popular characters. And in some cases, now there are yellow jack-o'-lantern type pumpkins. So for these minions, you might not even have to paint the yellow. They work good for floral arrangements. In college, we used to make quite a few floral arrangements, cutting open pumpkins and sticking flowers in those, and that works great for different decor ideas. This was fun. There was a guy in California that made the news probably about 10 years ago that he came up with plastic molds that he put the pumpkins in while they were growing, and he made Frankenstein pumpkins, and I think he sold them for $100 a piece. So there's a good value added. Lots of options for displays because they come in, as you can see, so many colors, shapes, sizes that they make great fall displays. And here's just a few more. One thing that's really popular now is the flat ones, like in these pictures, for stacking. So they make lots of pumpkin totems. And then after the season, what do? Many of those varieties that you decorated with are edible, remember? So you can check some of those out. They also keep very, very well so long as they're kept from being frozen. So if you bring them in the house, the longest I've kept a pumpkin in the house has been about 2 years. And that's why they were used traditionally for food for us and for livestock because of their ability to keep a long time. So here's some livestock enjoying some pumpkins. Wildlife also enjoy eating pumpkins, squirrels, rabbits, all of those things. They do make excellent compost. Just be aware that next year you might have some volunteers in the compost pile. And you can also decorate for the next holiday. So whether that's a Thanksgiving turkey or in this case, one year I painted some white and made a stack for a snowman. However, I will make the caveat that when it got cold, the paint flaked off of them. But so the next time I do it, I'm going to actually use white pumpkins. There's always room for more pumpkins to decorate or eat with. And that's all I've got for you.
Thanks, Katie. I love seeing those pictures of the different things. People can be so creative. I think it just makes the holidays fun. So appreciate that information. Are there any questions about pumpkins? Todd, has anything come across to you?
Not that I see.
All righty. Well, then we will move on. So another thing that we often do in the fall is we're thinking about creating some bee habitat or pollinator habitat. And it's really in popular media right now. So Eliza is here today with us to talk about how to maintain our bee motels, make sure that we're providing a safe, clean habitat for some of the bees as they winter. So Eliza, feel free to take it away.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Is everybody seeing my presentation?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. For those who don't know me, my name's Eliza Pessereau. I'm a field specialist in horticulture over here in the urban east. So I cover St. Louis County and Jefferson County and St. Charles as well, and the city of St. Louis. My background is in pollinator conservation. So today I want to talk about bee hotels, exactly like Gwen was saying. There are lots of different ways we can support bees and other pollinators in our yards, but there's also a lot of information out there that isn't totally correct. So I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of bee hotels, and then give you some other things that you can do to support pollinators in your yards. So I have a couple questions throughout, so I want everyone to use the chat if you'd like. Have you ever seen one of these bee hotels before? They also go by other names like pollinator hotels, bee houses. I have also heard maybe it's more of a permanent home instead of a short-term stay like a hotel. They're typically these wooden structures that have wood blocks with holes drilled in them, maybe some stems or reeds that have holes as well. And then there's sometimes other features added in as well, like pine cones or other bundles of sticks and things like that. Oh, someone is saying they have two. Awesome, Mary. So if you have seen or used bee hotels or have heard about them, I would love for you to put in the chat something that you think a bee hotel should do. And by should, I mean, like, what do you think the goals are of bee hotels? Sue says for solitary bees to lay eggs. Exactly. House insect eggs and larvae, provide safe space to reproduce. Yeah, so these are all great reasons why we have bee hotels. So bee hotels are primarily to provide quality nesting habitat, so a home, for cavity nesting bees, so specific types of bees. And our hope is that they will then increase native bee populations, as we've probably all been hearing about, bee populations on the decline, specifically native bee populations. And bee hotels can also be a really great tool for education and teaching people about solitary and cavity nesting bees. So there's actually 20% of bee species in the US, in North America, that use cavity nests, like those used in bee hotels. Some you might already know, like large carpenter bees and small carpenter bees. There's also leafcutter bees and mason bees, like if you've ever seen a bee carrying a leaf or a circular cutout on a leaf, that's usually from a leafcutter bee actually taking pieces of that leaf for their nest. And then wool carder bees and yellow-faced bees. So the other 80% of bees that are native to North America nest in the ground. So it's really these 20% of species of native bees that are using those cavity nests. And so the cavity nests on the inside of the stem will look like this. A solitary bee will lay her egg in a cell and provide that egg in the cell on the stem with a pollen ball. So you see the orange balls on the screen, that's a ball of pollen. So in the bottom left, we have an egg that has hatched into a larvae, and it is eating the pollen ball. The bee will actually lay multiple eggs within a stem, and in between each cell with the egg, she will create a partition using leaf or leaf material, or sometimes mud or other plant material. And so that's what that yellow partition is in between each of the larvae on this photo. And then while larvae, once they have finished their pollen, they will actually pupate. So in the bottom right corner of the photo, that means they turn into adult. They go into the next life stage. And that all happens within these stems. Then once the larvae has pupated and is an adult, they'll emerge from the stem in the spring. So typically in nature, these cavity nesting bees are nesting in plant stems. So anytime you trim a shrub, or what we have on the left here is stiff goldenrod, that soft, pithy material on the inside of the stem is really great for bees to carve away at and create their nest inside. However, with modern development, agriculture reducing habitat for bees in a lot of different ways, and urban development as well, a lot of this nesting habitat is no longer available. So that's kind of where bee hotels come in. It's an artificial way to create these cavity nests that bees can use. So there are a couple of things that we really want to consider in order for bee hotels to be successful. The material that you use is important. There are a lot of commercially available bee hotels, but you can also build your own. So stems and or wood blocks are useful. You can drill holes into wood blocks. The diameter of the holes themselves is super important, because different sized bees that are cavity nesters will only use cavities that are certain sizes that match their body size. So a good range is about a 1/16 of an inch to a 1/2 inch diameter in holes. And so especially if you're using wood blocks, you can find a drill bit that will drill a hole that's that size. Holes should be closed on one end, and that means that when the bee is going in to create her nest, there's not going to be an opening on the other end that predators can enter in and actually end up eating her eggs and larvae. The nest also needs protection from rain and predators. So the photo here, we have a little roof on the bee hotel that's providing some protection from the rain. Also, where you place the hotel is important, so that if there's rain or a steady stream from a gutter or something that comes off of a building, it's not going to be hitting the bee hotel. And there's some other protection from predators that we saw in a photo earlier, like putting mesh over the actual entrance of the bee hotel. So you could cover this whole hotel with mesh. That way birds cannot get in and attack the nests. Management is also super important. So you can either add small paper straws into each of the drilled holes or into each of the stems that you replace every year. And that way you're basically cleaning out the nest so that there's no disease transfer between one year's bee hotel guests and the next year's. If paper straws doesn't feel like a good method to you, you could also have 2 separate bee hotels that you rotate throughout the years. So between the years, you'd either replace those straws or clean the stems and blocks using a bleach solution. And I'll have a resource I'll share at the end to help you learn about cleaning those hotels. The hotel that is then out of commission that has a whole bunch of nests that are filled, or those straws that are filled with nests from the previous year, those will then go into an emergence box. And there are some that you can buy on the internet, but you can also easily make your own. Really any type of cardboard box or wooden box that has a small opening at the top will be helpful. So that over winter, those bees are in a safe place while you're either cleaning or setting up the next bee hotel. And then in the spring, you can put this box outside near where your second nest is. And then bees will emerge from their nests and leave the box. And then they can go start a new nest that is totally clean in your second bee hotel. So unfortunately, most bee hotels do not meet these goals. I guess not necessarily most, but a lot of what's available on the market is not necessarily up to standard with what the research says that cavity nesting bees need. So for example, this hotel, let's say the hotel on the right here, this is one that a group had made for a park, and they had used all plastic straws that were the same diameter. And the back of this nest was open. So there was very little protection from predators. And then the material that was used is not something that bees would normally be using and could be harmful to them. There's also only a single diameter since all of the straws are the same size here. So only one type of bee is really going to be able to use that nest. Sometimes there are also features like butterfly houses that are included, and there's not anything wrong with those. They just won't really be used by butterflies because butterflies don't use houses the same way that cavity nesting bees will use these cavities. So if you see one of these that has in the left-hand photo, there's a part in the middle of the bee hotel that has 3 vertical slots. Those are supposedly for butterflies, but butterflies won't actually use them. If someone has seen a butterfly using one, though, let me know. And importantly, as I mentioned before, all of these hotels do require management, which isn't always communicated when someone buys a bee hotel. So I mentioned this a little bit, but with these bee hotels, there are a couple things that can go wrong. So there's been some research that has shown that in some bee hotels that were put out, it wasn't actually native cavity nesting bees that were using them, but there are a lot of non-native bees who still are doing pollination, but are not necessarily our goal with putting out bee hotels that ended up using the nests. Oftentimes wasps end up using the nests, which can be fine as long as you're okay with there being some wasps in your yard and you're ready to kind of adjust safety around the yard in case they're stinging wasps. They might just be parasitoid wasps, though, that won't actually sting. Introduced wasp populations could also increase if you have this nesting habitat that's good for introduced wasps. Additionally, normally when cavity nesting bees would nest in nature, their nests are pretty far apart. It'll be maybe a couple nests on a plant that has cut stems. But when we create large bee hotels that are really high density, almost like a big apartment building. The nests are much closer together than they would be in nature. And so there's a much greater opportunity for predation and parasitism. So parasitoid wasps, like the one we see in the photo on the left that says E, that will actually lay their eggs inside the nests or the larvae of cavity nesting bees, they're going to be much more attracted to a nest that has, or a bee hotel that has a lot of filled cells of bees. So the smaller the bee hotel, the better, because it's not necessarily going to attract the attention of predators or parasitoids. And then disease spread can happen as well. The photo on the right here where it says F is actually of a bird that attacked a bee hotel. And so that's an instance where having that mesh over the cover can be really helpful because birds will not be able to get in that way. So are all bee hotels bad? Definitely not. Bee hotels, like I said earlier, are really helpful for education specifically. There are some great models of bee hotels out there that actually have a panel that you can open and then you can see inside the cavity nests themselves. So these can be a great tool for education, to teach school groups, master gardeners even, that cavity nesting bees exist, and this is the type of habitat they need and we need to be creating in our gardens and yards. They can be effective for small scale conservation as long as they're managed properly. So yeah, having a bee hotel in your yard is going to increase the nesting habitat that you have for cavity nesting bees, as long as you manage it properly to make sure that there's not disease spread. Since in your yard, you might not necessarily be able to have all of the plants that would be in a natural area that would create the same amount of nesting habitat. And then, of course, if you're buying a commercially available model instead of making your own, just make sure you are you're checking off those boxes like diameter, size, and protection from rain and predators, and the end of each cavity being closed. And I see a question in the chat. When should you trim stiff goldenrod stems for bees? Great question, Pamela. So save the stems is a really great alternative if you think using bee hotels, if I have to do all this management, that seems like a lot of work, or I have a bee hotel and I want to provide other habitat as well. So at this time of year in the fall, most of our plants are kind of dying off, even though it's still pretty warm here, might be a little bit longer. So we encourage you, based on the Xerces Society's guidelines, to leave your plants. So stiff goldenrod would be one of those, but all of your garden plants that are ornamental or native, and don't trim them until the spring because there's probably bees that are nesting in some of the previous year's cut back stems. So fall and winter, you should leave those plants as they are. In the spring, you can cut back the dead flower stalks. The old stem stubble will naturally decompose from the previous year, and bees will then emerge from the stems that were cut the previous year. In the summer, those stems that you just cut at varying lengths will get covered up by new growth that you have from that plant. And so it will not be as noticeable. And then in those stems that you had cut that spring, there will be nests living throughout the year, or there will be bee nests living and bees developing throughout the year. I want to note that when you are cutting back stems, it's important to cut them at different lengths. So between 8 and 24 inches of height is helpful because different sized bees need a different depth of a nest. A larger bee, each of the cells in their nest is going to be bigger, so they're going to need a much longer stem. So having a variety of lengths is important. So if you'd like to learn more or have more questions, there's a great publication from the Xerces Society on creating nesting and overwintering habitat where they talk a little bit more about saving the stems. Michigan State University also has a great publication on building bee hotels and maintaining bee hotels. They have information on how to clean out bee hotels if you're switching to every year. And then the Missouri Bee ID Guide has good information on which bees actually use some of these hotels. I see another question in the chat. What month do bees begin to nest for winter? So it really depends on the type of bee. There are bees that are just active in the spring, some that are active all summer, and then some that are active more at this time of the year. They're probably slowing down at this time of the year. So really all year long, bees are creating these nests. And some nests might have been created and then finished early on in the spring. And then those bees won't emerge until next year. So it's really all year long or throughout the growing season that this is happening. I did want to put out a little conversation prompt. If there are other nesting strategies that you have used or heard of to create nesting habitat for pollinators in your yard. If not, would you use one of these strategies, managing and using a bee hotel, or planting more native plants and saving the stems? And if so, why? Or if not, why not? Just to start a little bit of a conversation. And I can open that up to the other specialists as well. Jasmine says some bees need stems for 2 years. I did not realize that. I'm going to actually look that up because that I would be very interested in, because that would make sense. I know sometimes it does take a while for them to pupate and then emerge. So maybe there are some that have a 2-year life cycle. Shannon says they have bee cups around their flowers. That is great. Those bee cups will provide water, mostly for honeybees, actually, because honeybees use a lot of water. Can well-managed bee hotels for large carpenter bees decrease their tendency to bore through our deck, wood, etc.? Oh, will they like the hotels better? That's a really great question. I haven't seen any research on that specifically, but I would guess that if you have a bee hotel that is much more attractive than your deck, they will go towards that. Especially, and you might have tried this already, using a primer or some type of stain on your deck that deters carpenter bees, then having a bee hotel might attract them more towards that. There is always a possibility that then you will increase the carpenter bee population, and if they outgrow the hotel, then they might start using your deck a little bit more. So I think you could try it, but I would also make sure you're doing other things to deter carpenter bees from boring into your deck. Sue says, I use a bee hotel, but have had difficulty finding the various diameters in the tubes I use. That's a really great point. There's a couple of different companies out there that produce mason bee hotels specifically, since they can be used commercially. So I would say if you are looking, yeah, maybe look for a mason bee hotel provider, and they oftentimes will have really specific diameters of reeds or tubes that you could use. But if you're not able to find one, Sue, feel free to contact me and we can work through that together too. Jasmine says keeping logs in the yard will encourage carpenter bees to use those instead. I love that. Yes, I have had other folks put a log out in the yard. Carpenter bees will use that. And then you can even drill holes of different diameters, and stem nesting bees might use that as well. Awesome. Well, if that is everything for right now, I'll just say thank you all for listening. Here is my information, and I think my email was there at the beginning, but if not, I'll drop it in the chat in case anyone has more questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eliza. That was really good. Lots of interaction on the chat. I think this is an interesting topic, and I think people are wanting to do more to try to help out. So thank you for joining us today and giving us that information. All right, next we have another field specialist from the southeast part of the state who is going to talk about trimmer string maintenance. So we have to get our tools ready as well. So Traven, have at it.
All right. Is my screen looking all right? And can you hear me?
Everything's great.
Awesome. So a little bit of backstory. It seems kind of like a weird off topic about maintaining your trimmer string. So I always try to kind of minimize the amount of weed eating that I have to do around my yard, trying to mulch. But this year I've planted some more things and I really just can't escape that weed eater. So I found myself using it quite often. It broke down. It had to have a carburetor replacement. And then I kind of had that casual chat with the repair tech, and he mentioned about soaking the trimmer string in water. Now, this is something I've never heard of. Being honest, I haven't done a whole lot of weed eating myself until really this year. So I really was like, oh man, I never heard of it, but have other folks heard of it? So I'm usually never excited about the chore of weed eating, but I really couldn't hold back my enthusiasm for wanting to try this and test it out to see if it really made a difference of soaking your water. So if you have heard of this before, put a reaction or yes, no in the chat, and kind of get your experience with it. So what do the manufacturers recommend? I kind of took a deep dive and looking into what did they say. So I dug out my manual in the garage. It was dusty, a couple pages ripped and stained. I flipped through the entire thing and I couldn't find anything. What I failed to realize is that the head of the weed eater has different models. You can kind of see that by all the list of models on the screen. So I had to look that up as well. And sometimes the directions for that come as a separate booklet. So really didn't retain that. But if you're like me and you don't, some of that stuff, you may just lose it. You can go onto the manufacturer's website online. You can also call their customer service line, and they can kind of help you through that, maybe get you a copy. So after all that, I looked up my model and trimmer head and finally found that booklet to really kind of bust this myth of should I do that or is it just somebody pulling my leg? So flipping through, some manufacturers do recommend soaking the nylon line, or if you have a different type of trimmer head that uses the blades instead, to actually soak them. For these blades, for the example, it actually says to store them in a water bath for not just as new, but throughout their life. The other instructions on my screen, the string trimmer says a 12 to 24 hour soak before you use it. So I do want to note, I'm just using my weed eater as an example, and I'm not endorsing any type of brands. There's a lot of makes and models out there, and I would definitely check with your specific manufacturer's instructions. So diving a little bit deeper into this line material, there's all kinds of different types in trimmer line material. Sometimes it even comes in different shapes and thicknesses as well. But as a general rule, we have a kind of a standard nylon. So what this nylon is, it's really flexible, very, very affordable, and it's super common. Then there's also different composites. So you have different blends with polymers to help with that durability. If you have really, really heavy duty needs, you can have some that actually have the core, steel core for strength. And then at the one of the other ones is a special polymer blend, maybe with a nylon mix as well. So a lot of these are to really help you with your, if it's light weeding, medium, or heavy weeding. So the main thing is pick pick a nylon and a string and a material that kind of goes with your job to fit your needs for your job to help minimize that frustration. So looking into the characteristics, nylon is hygroscopic. So what this means is it actually absorbs moisture from its environment. If you're like me, I just throw my weed eater string in my hot shed or my greenhouse, and that nylon will dry out. And as it loses that moisture, it actually makes it more brittle and breaks it more easily to break. So soaking it for, for that 12 to 24-hour period is going to help kind of restore that flexibility and reduce breakage. I know for me, sometimes I'm out in the yard and just bumping my weed eater string and trying to get it to adjust. And if it breaks off, restring it. It's a lot, it can get kind of frustrating. So I feel like taking, 5 minutes and soaking it beforehand may help with a little bit of that frustration. So again, using those best practices, making sure you're using the line diameter that's required or suggested, and that soaking is really going to help with that. Looking at the symbol, I put a little star around it, and I try to enlarge it in the bottom corner here. This is the little symbol that is supposed to represent maybe a pre-soak. Actually, I was like, where is this? I had to look all over on some of the packages, and it's fairly small. So maybe that's why I've gone kind of all this time without noticing that. So how to prevent this brittle line? Dry conditions, temperature fluctuations, and also exposure to the sun and the elements. I know I see a lot of landscapers, after kind of learning more about this, I see a lot of landscapers going around and kind of finishing up those fall cleanups, and they have their rolls just on the back of their lawn or the back of their truck, just sitting there drying out. And I was like, man, if they would have kind of shared this info. So as far as some storage tips, store in a cool, moist environment, and before you want to give it a nice good soak before your heavy use or that peak season. And as far as your older line, if you've had it for several years and it's really, really brittle, you could try soaking it, but I would almost opt just to maybe buy a fresh roll or a new line and go from there. So a couple of takeaways and kind of questions. So looking at the forums, a couple questions kind of reoccurred. Can you keep it continuously in water? So out of those two examples, I would say it's going to depend on that product. Those two examples I had earlier for the poly blades, they said store and do a soak, just leave that kind of continuously. While the line, on the other hand, just needed probably a 24-hour soak before use. Another question I've kind of seen frequently too is, do I have to soak the new line? As a general rule, I would say it may depend on how it's packaged. But if it's kind of have an open packaged, I would say yes. So that new line, we don't know how long it's set on the warehouse shelf or set on the store shelf. So just as a general recommendation, give it a quick soak before you use it. Again, water is going to help, but I don't think it's going to be the end all fix all. If it's really, really degraded, it's not. There's only so much it can kind of reabsorb there. So I'd probably just suggest getting a new roll and then treating your trimmer line right from there. All right, so that was kind of a little odd topic, but after in my experience with using it kind of over the weekend, I did have a lot less having to bump the head, a lot less breakage. And that really was really nice because I didn't have to go through the whole restringing process. So if you have any experience, if you've tried this or not, or haven't heard of it before, go ahead and put your comments in the chat there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Traven. I did not even know that was a thing. So you can tell I never read the owner's manuals for those things. So that was good information. We have just about a minute left, so you can try to get your questions in the chat or to Todd at Ask Questions Here. We'll try to get those. You might want to include your email so that they can capture that, just so that they can contact you back, because we may not be able to answer it directly here on the meeting today. So our next meeting will be November 19th. We might take a betting pool to see whether or not we will have had a frost yet by then. Again, it will be noon to 1. You can register at the site that you see there. Or if you want to save the chat, you just go over to open the chat, and you go to the 3 little dots at the top and click them, and you'll get a menu pop down, and just go to save chat, and it will save it into a folder on your computer, depending on the type of computer that you have. So again, here are the horticulture specialists that are around the state. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any horticulture questions, and we will certainly try to get everything answered for you. And with that, I think we will end the day. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and rest of your week.